Susan Watts. Well, just before we came on air, I was joined by Professor Ross Anderson, a leading expert in security engineering at Cambridge University Computer Laboratory, Philip Hammond, the Shadow Treasury spokesman, and Jane Kennedy, the Financial Secretary to the Treasury. I started by asking her if the government guarantees to refund money to anyone who might lose out as a result of this security breach.
Well, the Chancellor made clear that nobody will lose as a result of any fraud arising out of this breakdown, if you want to call it that.
You don't know that?
But, well, what we are doing is working very hard to not only recover the discs themselves, but also to monitor the accounts and other...
Absolutely. But if somebody gets hold of these discs and uses them to access somebody's account and takes money out of it, will the government refund that money?
All I can tell you right at this moment is that the banking system has a system in place that will make sure that nobody is
It wasn't the banks who made the mistake.
Absolutely, and I'm not implying in any way that that is the case. What I would say to you is that as a result of this, there will be a number of inquiries after which we will be able to work out where liability lies.
Inquiries don't pay bills.
No, and the public can be reassured that, at least on this point, no individual member of the public will lose out financially as a result of this.
And that's because the guarantee is given by the government, or you expect the banks to give it?
No, in the first instance, the banks have made that guarantee, as would apply in any instance.
Absolutely, although in this case, of course, the banks didn't make the mistake, so
absolutely.
If they find themselves out of pocket, you will reimburse them.
And that is a discussion that we will have to have.
Can you tell us why it was that this data wasn't encrypted?
We're looking into all of the detail of that, and what happened was a clear breach of what is laid down in terms of the rules. So
the rules
we
say
know
the data should have been encrypted, did they?
For this particular database, it should not have been handled in the way that it was, which is why
originally...
Do the rules
say the data should have been encrypted?
The original offer of the data of 12 anonymised individual claims that was offered to the NAO originally was dealt with in the normal way for that data and was handled properly in the proper way.
So
now,
the rules do not say that the data should have been encrypted?
Since this incident has occurred, we have made sure that those sorts of rules are in place.
Why was it that it took 6 days for the Chancellor to get around to telling the banks?
Because Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs had a number of procedures in place. Not only were they investigating to see if the discs could be located, but they had put in place their own inquiry. And at that stage, we were advised on the Monday that there was some evidence to demonstrate that the discs could be recovered.
So you, nonetheless, took the decision off your own bat not to warn the banks?
We took advice as soon as we believed that the risk of the discs not being recovered was increasing. We took advice from the Information Commissioner, who advised us as we went forward that we must make every effort to make sure that remedial measures, in other words, measures to look after the public and protect the public, were in place before we made a public statement.
Professor Anderson, how surprised are you by what's happened?
I'm afraid I'm not surprised at all. Over the last 10 years, we've seen a move to what's called transformational government, which is a shorthand for putting together more and more public sector data into fewer and fewer, ever larger databases to which more and more people need routine access in order to do their jobs. This was an accident waiting to happen, and if it hadn't happened in this particular case, it would have happened elsewhere. What should really concern people is the fact that a low-level official was able to get his hands on the records of tens of millions of people and just put them on a disk and mail them out somewhere. Now, if things had been managed properly, then information of this sensitivity would have been labelled at least secret, and it would not have been physically possible to play it out onto a disk and remove it from a secure facility and put it in the post. But as time has gone on, more and more data in bigger databases to which hundreds of thousands of people need access to do their jobs.
Philip Hammond, this was, as in the old formulation made by the last Conservative government, this was an operational matter and not a policy matter. There is therefore no question, presumably, of any kind of political accountability. It was just a balls up in the system.
Well, we'll have to wait and see exactly what the review discovers about how the data security systems within HMRC and the Treasury were working. We have not, as some other politicians have done, rushed out and called for Alistair Darling's head on a plate. It's a finely balanced judgment, but I think he now has to answer the questions about how this incident has arisen, and he has to critically to try to rebuild public confidence in the Treasury, because this is not an isolated incident. There have been earlier incidents of data protection lapses. There's the whole Northern Rock saga running in the background, and he's got quite a challenge to show that he can get on top of this job and that he is competent to do it over the next few weeks.
This must, though, mean that the whole ID card scheme is dead, isn't it?
It absolutely must. How can the people of Britain possibly trust the government with all their personal data, 60 million people, when it's clearly shown that it is not capable, not competent to manage the data that it already has at this level?
Do you accept that that is part of the fallout of this?
Not necessarily at all. And in fact, what I think is that a more modern...
completely incapable of managing this data.
Well, a more modern system has many more protections built into it than the system that we're talking about that has been compromised as a result of this action. But even with an old system, if HMRC had followed their own procedures and obeyed their own rules, we would not be having this debate this evening.
And
you just heard from the
government to obey the rules and follow its own procedures.
This is the nation's authority in this field. He says this was an accident waiting to happen.
I accept that there are very serious issues for us to address. That is why we're working so hard to address them. And there are many things in what the Professor has said that I absolutely agree with. This data should not have been handled in the way that it was. It should have been protected to a much greater level than it was. And if it had to have been moved
Professor,
at
what do
all,
you think?
it ought to have been moved properly according to procedure.
I mean, ID cards another matter altogether, much safer.
ID cards don't have really very much to do with security. They're a political thing. But if we return to the matter in hand, I'm afraid that there is a policy issue here, not an operational issue, because the government has repeatedly, over the last few years, brushed aside one lot of advice after another about the growing problems of privacy and safety with aggregating more and more data. We wrote a report for the Information Commissioner in November last year pointing out that the proposed children's databases were both unsafe and illegal. That was brushed aside. Lord Brewer's House of Lords Science and Technology Committee reported earlier this year saying that the government needed to get its act together on personal internet security. A large part of that was Treasury responsibility, better regulation of online banking. That was brushed aside. Health Committee reported in September saying that people needed a right to opt out of the large central databases of personal medical information that the NHS is collecting. That was brushed aside. Again and again and again, these warnings have been made in different contexts by expert groups, and the government has not been interested.
I don't accept the charge that we brushed report after report aside at all. And in fact, my experience working in the short period in which I've been in the Treasury is that there is clearly very much more to do, and there are some serious lessons for us to learn as a result of what has happened and been
Families
reported
right
to
across
us.
this country ever trust you again?
I think we have to demonstrate that we have put in place measures that will do that.
I'm sorry, you've just demonstrated utter incompetence.
The way in which we have been able to work... I'm sorry?
After the security breach in September, when 15,000 people's data was compromised, the Treasury issued a statement saying that it had put in place measures to make sure that this could never happen again. And just a month later, it did happen again. So how can we have any confidence?
If the measures had been followed in the way that was intended,
but that's the whole point.
we would not be having this discussion tonight.
But putting measures in place is not writing a procedure down. It's putting in place the management systems that ensure those procedures are followed.
Right.
That's the responsibility of the senior management in any organisation.
But that is why I want to have in front of me the exact report from not only the Metropolitan Police after their investigation, but also the independent report that we've commissioned, headed by PricewaterhouseCoopers, who will give us, well, the Chancellor has made it clear he wants a very quick interim report, but then he wants a very full report, so that we can not only in the Treasury with HMRC learn the lessons that we need to learn from this, but that we can learn those lessons across government, so that we can answer, so that we can answer the kinds of charges that we've had.
Is there anything that could be done to change the procedures that could make them safe?
No, because the fundamental problem is this. If, for example, your medical records are available to the 10 staff in your general practice, together with the records of 10,000 other people, there might occasionally be a compromise, a careless receptionist, but it's something that historically has been manageable. However, if you take 50 million medical records and make them available to 300,000 people, there's no way that you can create procedures that will protect that. There's too valuable an asset to which too many people have access. There are issues here of system architecture, of policy, and of how electronic government is managed from the top down.
And we need to learn those. We really do.
You certainly do.
Thank
you all very much indeed.
Thank you.
And if you're troubled by any of those issues, you can log on to the BBC News website. There's a series of questions and answers there at bbc.co.uk/news. Coming up on the programme, contenders for the leadership of the Liberal Democrats debate live in the studio. Before that, though,